My brother ruined my marriage, so I discovered his scam and exposed everything at his engagement party. I had a solid marriage with the woman I considered my soulmate. We met at a networking event in New York. I had gone as a young entrepreneur trying to expand my network of contacts, and she, a public relations expert, was attending to represent her company. I remember that we were both bored with the same generic speeches when by chance we ended up talking together at the bar. She was brilliant, with a laugh that filled the room and a sharp mind that could hold deep conversations on any topic. We spent the whole night talking, first about business, but then about our dreams and aspirations. An hour turned into 2, and when we finally said goodbye, we exchanged numbers with a feeling that something big was beginning. A year later, we were married. We bought a house in the outskirts of Denver, a quiet place with a perfect view of the mountains. She wanted a garden to plant flowers, and I, always more practical, thought about how the house would be a good long-term investment. It was our little paradise. We adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Max, and we started talking about starting a family. It seemed that we had everything figured out, but there was something that always bothered me, something that I couldn't get out of my head. My brother is difficult to explain. Our dynamic, he had always been the center of attention in our family, the typical golden child who never did anything wrong, got the best grades, was the favorite of the teachers and of course of our parents. I, on the other hand, was always the other one. Not that I didn't have achievements, they just never seemed to be enough in comparison to him. Despite everything, I never thought he would ruin my life the way he did. Everything started to change when my wife started to act strangely. Normally we used to talk about anything from what we did during the day to plans for the future, but suddenly she seemed distant, spent hours on her cell phone, said she had a lot of things on her mind, and when I asked her if something was wrong, she simply answered, "It's nothing, I'm just tired." Then came the day that I found a note in the kitchen. It was nothing more than a simple piece of paper torn from a pad, but the words hit me like a truck. "I'm sorry, I can't go on with this. You're not who I thought you were. Please don't look for me." I remember standing there holding that piece of paper, feeling the ground crumbling beneath my feet. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. I sent messages, emails, even I went to her office. Nothing worked. When I spoke to her secretary, she looked at me with pity and said she asked that you not contact her here either. I was devastated. I spent days locked up at home trying to understand what had gone wrong. Had I done anything to hurt her? Had I misinterpreted something in our relationship? My friends tried to console me, but they couldn't say anything that really helped. Everything seemed like a bad dream. A couple of weeks later, I received a call from my brother. His tone was strange, a mixture of pity and something else that I couldn't identify at the time. He asked me to meet to talk, saying that he had something important to show me. When I arrived, he was sitting in the living room with his phone in his hand. He told me, "I know this is going to be difficult, but you have to see it." Then he showed me a series of messages and photos that, according to him, my wife had sent him. In those messages, she spoke of how unhappy she was with me, of how she had discovered that I was cheating on her with a co-worker. There were even photos of me with another woman in what looked like a date. I was stunned. None of that was true, but the pictures looked so real, the messages so convincing, that I didn't know what to think. I tried to defend myself, explain that I had never been unfaithful, but he just shook his head and said, "I'm not here to judge you, but she is hurt. Maybe you should let her go." I spent weeks in a cloud of confusion and pain. I had no way to contact my wife, and every time I tried to explain to her what was happening, she simply ignored my attempts. It was as if my whole life had fallen apart in an instant. However, something didn't add up. The messages that my brother showed me had strange details, things that didn't quite match what I knew about my wife. I couldn't pinpoint it at the time, but there was something weird. I decided to investigate on my own. I started looking for anything that could help me understand what was going on. I gathered pieces of information here and there, and little by little I began to discover the truth. What I found left me frozen. My brother had fabricated everything: the photos, the messages, even the rumors circulating among some of our acquaintances had all been manipulated by him. Why he did it, I still don't know. If it was out of envy for the desire to sabotage something I had and he didn't, or simply because he could, but one thing was for sure: he had ruined my marriage. At that moment I decided that I couldn't let it pass. If he had taken everything from me, I was going to wait for the perfect moment to return it. And that moment arrived 5 years later, when he least expected it. During the next 5 years I focused on rebuilding my life, but the wound my brother had caused never healed completely. I knew he had fabricated everything, that he had manipulated the circumstances to destroy my marriage, but I never directly confronted my brother, in part because I knew he would deny everything, and in part because I had a plan. The relationship with my parents was still complicated. They had always had a bias in favor of my brother, and when my marriage fell apart they seemed more interested in finding ways to justify it than in supporting me. Maybe it's just not the right person for you, my mother used to say. My father, on the other hand, was more direct. Surely you did something to make her leave. I swallowed all that. For years I focused on my work, on trying to stabilize myself emotionally, and although I went out with some people I never fully trusted again, I couldn't help feeling that someone else could do the same to me. And that fear became a barrier difficult to overcome. Meanwhile, my brother continued with his life. He was thriving, or at least that's what it seemed. He had gotten an important promotion at his job and started a relationship with a woman that everyone considered perfect for him. Even my parents never stopped praising her. She's so polite, so charming, she's definitely the one. At first I didn't think much about her. It wasn't my business, and I was too busy dealing with my own problems to pay attention to his life. But things started to change when rumors about his relationship reached me. A mutual friend, someone who knew my brother since college, told me one night after a few beers, "You know, your brother is thinking about proposing to his girlfriend. It seems he wants to do something big." That casual comment that in other circumstances I would have ignored sparked a spark in me. If he was planning on getting married, I had an opportunity. One could expose him. I could return the harm that he had done to me. For years I had been collecting information about him without even realizing I was doing it. I knew how he acted, how he manipulated situations to come out on top, and most importantly, I knew that he wasn't as perfect as he wanted to believe. I decided to get closer to him, pretending that I wanted to repair our relationship. I offered to help him with the preparations for his big proposal. Although my insides were boiling with rage, I managed to maintain a calm facade. I asked him questions about his relationship, about how he had met his girlfriend, and how their dynamic was. The more he spoke, the more evident it became that although she seemed to be an incredible person, he didn't really value her. The things got more interesting when I started to notice certain patterns in his behavior. He was always checking his phone, even in moments when he should be present. One day, while we were in a cafe planning details for a surprise party he wanted to organize for his girlfriend, I realized that he was smiling while reading messages and sneaking off to the bathroom frequently. Something was not right. I decided to investigate. At first it was difficult, but soon I discovered what I had been suspecting. My brother had a parallel relationship through social networks and a little bit of detective work. I found photos and posts that confirmed that he was seeing another woman. She worked with him, and from what I could deduce, they had been seeing each other for months in secret. That was enough to convince me that my plan had to be executed. Not only had he destroyed my marriage, but now he was playing with the feelings of a woman who really seemed to love him. I couldn't let him get away with it again. I spent weeks collecting evidence, screenshots of his messages on social media, photos of him with his lover in compromising situations, and details that corroborated that he was leading a double life. I even found out that he had used money that his girlfriend thought was for the wedding on gifts for this other woman. While all this was happening, my brother was moving forward with his proposal plans. He wanted to organize a big party in an elegant restaurant in downtown Denver with all his friends and family present. He asked for my help to coordinate some of the details, and although it was hard for me to keep calm, I accepted. I knew that this was my opportunity. The day of the party arrived and everything was perfectly organized. The restaurant was decorated with flowers, lights, and an atmosphere that screamed romance. My brother was visibly nervous but also excited. His girlfriend arrived in a blue dress that made her look like she came out of a fairy tale. It was evident that she was completely in love with him. As I watched all this from a corner, I felt a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I knew that what I was about to do was necessary, but on the other hand, I couldn't help feeling some guilt for her. She didn't deserve to go through this, but she deserved even less to live a lie. Just when my brother stood up to make his big speech and kneel with the ring in his hand, I decided to act. I stood up and asked for the attention of everyone present. Before this continues, I think there is something that everyone should know. My heart was beating so fast that I felt it was going to explode, but I couldn't stop. I took out my phone and started showing everything I had discovered. The air in the room froze when I uttered those words. All eyes were on me, and I could feel the weight of the questioning looks. My brother, who was still standing with the ring in his hand, looked at me with disbelief. "What the hell are you doing?" he whispered through gritted teeth, trying to maintain his composure in front of the others. But I wasn't there to back down. After 5 years of carrying this burden, the time had come to unleash the truth. "I know that this is an important moment for you, but I also know that everyone deserves to know what is really going on before this progresses." My voice remained firm even though my hands were trembling slightly. As I took out my phone, I started showing the evidence on a screen that was connected to the restaurant system. Yes, I had planned everything in advance with a quick Bluetooth connection. The photos and messages appeared on a large screen visible to everyone present. The first images showed my brother hugging another woman, holding hands, and in situations that left no room for doubt. At first there was a profound silence. You could hear the clatter of the cutlery that someone dropped on their plate. My brother reacted immediately, standing up abruptly and trying to turn off the screen. But the damage was already done. Several people had already taken out their phones to record what was happening. This is not what it looks like, he shouted, his face red with rage and shame. But I didn't end there. I opened the message history between him and his lover. I read aloud fragments of their conversations. I'm tired of pretending with her. You're the only one I want to be with. She would never understand my true needs. But you do. The girlfriend of my brother, who until that moment had been sitting with a confused smile, began to understand what was happening. Her face went from disbelief to pain and then to tears. Is this true? She asked my brother, her voice barely a whisper. He tried to deny it, stammering excuses, but the evidence was there in black and white for everyone to see. Of course, my brother didn't give up easily. He tried to change the narrative, and as expected, he pointed the finger at me again. This is just another way for you to ruin me. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to destroy my life because you can't fix yours. It took all the self-control I had to not lose my composure. I looked him directly in the eyes and responded calmly. Jealousy? Is that what you think? You ruined my marriage 5 years ago. You fabricated evidence. You invented lies, all to destroy something that I had, and now here we are. But this time I'm not going to keep quiet. My words resonated in the room. Several people began to murmur. Some of my brother's friends seemed uncomfortable, while others moved away from him as if he had committed a crime. My parents, on the other hand, were pale. My mother tried to intervene. It's not the time or place for this. You're ruining your brother's life. I'm ruining his life, I replied with a bitter laugh. And what about what he did to mine? What about all the lies that cost me my marriage? You have always defended him, but this time I'm not going to stay silent. While this was happening, my brother's girlfriend got up. Her tears had ceased, but the fury on her face was evident. She walked up to him and gave him a resounding slap that echoed throughout the room. I can't believe I was about to marry you. You are a liar and a manipulator. With that, she threw the ring on the ground and ran out of the restaurant. My brother tried to follow her, but he was stopped by one of his friends who whispered something in his ear before leaving as well. Little by little, the room began to empty. What had started as a celebration had turned into a public spectacle of shame. My parents were left behind, evidently in shock. My mother tried again to appeal to my empathy. This is a tragedy. Look what you've done. You've destroyed your own brother. I looked at her directly and replied, no, he destroyed his life when he decided to betray the people who trusted him. I just did what was necessary so that everyone would know the truth. That night, my brother lost more than a relationship. He lost the trust of his social circle, his reputation, and most importantly, his facade of perfection. But for me, this was not just about revenge. It was a closure. I left the restaurant with a strange feeling of relief. For the first time in years, I felt that I had regained control of my life. However, I knew that this was not the end. There were consequences to come, and I was prepared to face them. The impact of what happened at the party did not take long to crumble the structures that my brother had built over the years. That same night, I received a flood of messages and calls, both from people who had been at the event and from relatives who heard the rumors. My parents, of course, did not hesitate to summon me to an urgent meeting at their house. I agreed to attend, not because I wanted to apologize, but because I needed to make things clear once and for all. When I arrived, I found a scene that I already knew well. My parents sitting on the sofa, my mother with an expression of indignation, and my father serious, but without speaking too much, as if he expected me to admit my guilt. My brother was there too, with red eyes from what appeared to be hours of crying and rage. Why did you do that? Was the first thing my mother said, her voice trembling. That was not the place or the time. You humiliated him in front of everyone, and now nobody wants to talk to him. Is that what you wanted? I took a moment to breathe before answering. Seriously, is that what you think this is all about? Humiliating him? No, Mom, this is about him facing the consequences of his actions for the first time in his life. My father, who until that moment had remained in silence, finally intervened. You made his girlfriend leave him. Exposing him like that was cruel. You could have talked to him in private. Talk to him in private, I replied, trying to stay calm. Like when he ruined my marriage and left me sinking without explanation. Did he talk to me in private before fabricating lies and destroying my life? No, Dad, he did not deserve a private conversation. What he deserved was for everyone to see who he really is. My brother, who until then had remained silent, exploded. You're a damn resentful person. You always have been. You did all this because you could never surpass me. You were always in the shadows, and now you're trying to drag me into the same hole where you lived. The words were harsh, but instead of getting angry, I laughed, a bitter laugh full of years of accumulated frustration. Is that what you think this is about? Jealousy? No, this has nothing to do with envy. This has to do with you ruining something that was good in my life simply because you could. You destroyed me because it gave you pleasure to see me fall, and now for the first time you are the one on the floor. The atmosphere was so tense that you could cut it with a knife. My mother tried to intervene, but I stopped her by raising a hand. No, Mom, you two are just as responsible as he is. You always protected him. You always found excuses for him, and when I tried to tell you what he had done, you took his side, you never listened to me, so if now you feel that your golden boy is suffering, know that you helped create this mess." After that the conversation fell apart. My brother stood up abruptly, pushing a chair as he passed, and left the room without saying another word. My parents tried to get me to stay to fix things, but there was nothing left to discuss. In the following days the consequences became more evident. My brother tried to justify what had happened at the party with his close circle, but he failed to convince anyone. The evidence that I had presented was too clear, and the girlfriend who stopped being so was quick to share her side of the story with anyone who wanted to listen. Even at his work the scandal did not go unnoticed. The other woman with whom he was involved turned out to be a colleague from his office, and their secret relationship not only violated internal policies, but also reached the ears of his superiors. 2 weeks after the party I found out that he had been fired. My family, as was to be expected, fell into a spiral of chaos. My parents refused to accept that the fault was completely my brother's, and instead began to blame me for having exposed everything. "You could have handled it in another way," my mother would tell me in every call. "You don't see that he lost everything too? What was the point?" But for me it had been worth it. For the first time I didn't feel like I was living under his shadow. Yes, things were a mess, but there was a freedom in knowing that I would no longer be silent. A month after the party I received an unexpected message. It was from my brother's ex-girlfriend. She wanted to meet with me. I hesitated, thinking that maybe she was looking for a way to claim me for the public spectacle, but I accepted. We met in a small cafe away from prying eyes. "Thank you" was the first thing she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had spent weeks processing a mountain of emotions. I know it was a mess, and that it hurt me at the time, but in the end, thank you for telling me the truth. We spent a couple of hours talking. She told me how she had idealized my brother throughout their relationship, ignoring the signs that indicated that something was not right. When she finally knew the truth, she felt devastated, but also relieved. "If I had married him, it would have been a terrible mistake," she said with a melancholy smile. "So although it hurt, you gave me the opportunity to escape before it was too late." That meeting made me reflect. Although my plan of revenge had been born from pain and rage, it had also prevented someone else from going through the same thing as me. That didn't make it perfect, but it gave me some peace. The meeting with my brother's ex-girlfriend marked a before and after in my perspective on what happened. Although my initial motivation had been revenge, upon hearing how the truth had freed her from a relationship based on lies, I felt that everything had been worth it. But I knew that there was still more to come. My brother was not someone who accepted his mistakes easily, and neither were my parents. In the following weeks my family was plunged into chaos. My brother, who had always been the star of the family, was in a free fall. He lost his job shortly after the party when his boss discovered his inappropriate relationship with a colleague. The rumors in his social circle didn't help. Most of his friends began to distance themselves from him, either because they were upset about his lies or because they didn't want to get involved in the drama. My parents, of course, tried once again to save his reputation. They began to organize family meetings and talk to my brother's friends to clarify things, but the facts were impossible to ignore. Every time someone mentioned the evidence I showed at the party, my parents changed the subject or tried to justify it with phrases like "he's not like that normally," or "he was just going through a bad time." The situation reached a critical point when my mother called me one night. At first I thought it was one of her typical calls to scold me, but this time her tone was different, more urgent. "Your brother wants to talk to you," she said bluntly. "What could he want to talk about?" I asked, surprised. "To blame me again, to tell me that I ruined his life. I've already heard it all." She paused as if she was looking for the words. "He's in a bad place. Please just come and talk to him for your family." Although I doubted, I decided to accept, not for him or even for my parents, but to close this chapter once and for all. I went to his apartment, which until then I had never visited. I was surprised at how messy everything was. The person who had always projected a perfect image now lived in a physical chaos that reflected his mental state. My brother was sitting on the sofa with a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table in front of him. He didn't bother to get up when I came in. He simply looked at me with tired eyes and pointed to a chair for me to sit down. "I guess you came to gloat," he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't answer, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm not here for that, but you asked to talk to me, so here I am." A moment of silence passed before he finally spoke. "You know, I never thought we would get to this. We always competed, we always had our differences, but I never thought you hated me enough to do this to me." "Hate you?" I repeated, feeling that my patience was running out. "This is not hate, this is justice. Do you really think that what happened at that party was worse than what you did to me? You fabricated evidence, you destroyed my marriage and left me in ruins for years. What did you expect me to just stay silent?" He looked down, seemingly without an answer. Finally he murmured, I didn't think it was going to destroy you so much. I interrupted him, unable to contain my anger. "You just wanted to sabotage something good, because you couldn't stand that I had something that you didn't. That's all." Another moment of silence. This time I broke it. Look, what happened can't be changed. What you did destroyed part of my life, but it also made me stronger. Now I'm in a better place with more clarity about what I want and what I deserve. But you're here alone because you can't accept your own mistakes. Want some advice? Face what you did and start again. No one else can fix your life for you. He did not answer me, but for the first time I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen before. Remorse. After that night I completely distanced myself from my brother. It was not a decision made with hate, but out of necessity. I needed to move on without carrying the weight of our broken relationship. As for my parents, our relationship also changed. I started setting clear boundaries. I made it clear to them that although I loved them, I would not tolerate more favoritism or emotional manipulation. Over time, I think they started to understand. My life, on the other hand, finally began to flourish. My career advanced, and after a lot of personal work, I found the strength to open myself up to love again. I met someone incredible at a casual event. She knew about my past because I was honest from the beginning, and instead of backing away, she decided to support me. As for my brother, I heard through mutual friends that he started therapy. He moved to another city to start over, away from the circle that once admired him and then rejected him.